The Duke's hand was ice when it closed around hers. No warmth, no mercy, just the cold finality of a business deal signed in flesh instead of ink. Eliza Hawthorne stood at the altar in a dress that cost more than her father's entire estate, the estate that no longer existed. She was 22 years old and she was being sold. Not to a husband, to a stranger who looked at her the way men looked at horses at auction. This is her story. Stay until the end to see how a woman with nothing became everything they said she couldn't be. Drop a like and tell us what city you're watching from. The chapel smelled like old money and older lies. Eliza kept her eyes on the stained glass window behind the altar, St. Catherine holding her wheel, serene in her martyrdom. She wondered if the saint had felt this numb when they came for her. This emptied out, like someone had scooped everything vital from her chest and left only the mechanics. Lungs that breathed, heart that beat, hands that trembled so slightly no one but her could feel it. "Do you, Eliza Margaret Hawthorne, take this man?" She didn't hear the rest. The words were formality, and formality was all this was. A transaction dressed in white silk and orange blossoms. Her father had signed the papers 3 weeks ago, his hand shaking so badly the solicitor had to steady the inkwell. She'd watched from the doorway of his study, the study that would belong to creditors by month's end, and understood that she was the last asset he had to liquidate. "I do." Her voice came out steady. She'd give herself that much. Victor Blackmore didn't look at her when he said his vows. His eyes were fixed somewhere past the priest's left shoulder, his jaw set like a man enduring a minor inconvenience. He was 38, she'd been told. Tall, dark-haired, wealthy beyond imagination. Those were the facts she'd been given, along with one other. He needed a wife for appearances, and she needed to not be destitute. The rest? Who he was, what he wanted, why a duke of his standing would marry a ruined nobody from Hampshire, remained unspoken. When the priest declared them wed, Victor's lips barely grazed her cheek. The contact lasted less than a second. Then he stepped back, adjusting his cuffs with the precision of a man who just completed a mildly tedious task. "The carriage is waiting," he said. "Not our carriage, not shall we. Just a statement of fact." Eliza gathered her skirts. Too much fabric, too heavy, like being buried in an expensive shroud, and followed him down the aisle. The chapel was nearly empty. Her father hadn't come. Couldn't, she supposed. Facing her would mean facing what he'd done, and Richard Hawthorne had never been good at facing anything. The few guests present were Victor's people, stern-faced men in dark coats. A woman in purple who watched Eliza with the kind of pity that feels like condescension. No one smiled. No one threw rice or flowers. This wasn't that kind of wedding. Outside, November rain hammered the cobblestones. The Duke's carriage stood like a black fortress on wheels, the Blackmore crest gleaming on its door, a raven clutching a crown. Victor climbed in without offering his hand. Eliza managed on her own, the wet hem of her dress dragging mud across the carriage floor. He sat across from her, not beside her. The space between them might as well have been an ocean. "We'll stop once," Victor said as the carriage lurched forward, "to change horses. We should reach the estate by nightfall." Eliza nodded. She'd assumed they were going to Blackmore Hall, the Duke's primary residence in Kent. Everyone knew of it. A sprawling manor with formal gardens and a ballroom that could hold 200. "Will there be a reception?" she asked. Her voice sounded small in the enclosed space. "No." "I see. And your family, will I meet them soon?" "I have no family." He said it the way some men say I have no interest in opera or I have no taste for Brussels sprouts. Flat. Final. Eliza twisted her hands in her lap. The ring he'd placed on her finger was too large. It kept sliding around, the sapphire facing inward, scratching her palm. "My father asked me to convey his gratitude," she tried again, "for your generosity." Victor's eyes cut to her then. They were gray, she noticed, the color of November itself. "Your father sold you to clear 40,000 pounds of gambling debt and a mortgage he defaulted on twice," he said. "There was no generosity, only math." The words hit like a slap, but Eliza kept her face neutral. She'd learned that much in the 3 weeks since the engagement, how to hold still while being cut. "I understand the terms," she said quietly. "Do you?" "You needed a wife. My father needed capital. The arrangement benefits both parties. It benefits me, Victor corrected. You simply avoid ruin. There's a difference. He turned his gaze to the rain-streaked window, dismissing her. Eliza sat back against the velvet seat and made herself breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The technique her mother had taught her before she died, back when Eliza was 8 and afraid of thunderstorms. You can't stop the storm, darling, but you can be the tree that bends and doesn't break. She'd been bending for 14 years. She wondered how much more bending she had left in her. The first stop came 2 hours later at a posting inn that smelled of wet wool and boiled mutton. Victor disappeared inside without a word. Eliza remained in the carriage, watching through the fogged glass as ostlers changed the horses with mechanical efficiency. A girl, no more than 15, all elbows and dirty apron, appeared at the carriage door with a basket. "Begging your pardon, milady," she said, eyes down. "Cook thought you might want something warm. It's a long road ahead." Eliza took the basket. Inside, bread, cheese, a small jar of preserves, and a flask of what smelled like weak tea. "Thank you," Eliza said. "What's your name?" The girl's eyes went wide. "Mary, milady." "Thank you, Mary. Please tell your cook I'm grateful." The girl bobbed an awkward curtsy and scurried off, glancing back twice as if Eliza might vanish if she looked away. Eliza ate the bread slowly, savoring the yeasty warmth. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper meal. The final weeks at Hawthorne Manor had been lean, creditors circling, servants disappearing, rooms closed off one by one as they sold the furniture to keep the candles burning another month. Victor returned 20 minutes later, smelling of tobacco and rain. He glanced at the basket, then at her. "I didn't ask for provisions," he said. "The cook was kind." The cook was presumptuous. He rapped on the roof. The carriage jolted forward. They rode in silence as the countryside blurred past, fields giving way to hills, hills to thick forest. The rain never stopped. It drummed against the roof, relentless, like something trying to get in. Eliza must have dozed because when she opened her eyes, the light had changed. No longer the flat gray of afternoon, but the bruised purple of dusk. Victor was reading a letter, his expression unreadable. "Where are we?" she asked. "Northumberland." Eliza sat up straighter. "Northumberland? But I thought, your estate in Kent. You thought wrong." "I don't understand. Blackmore Hall is not where you'll be living." The words settled over her like frost. "Then where?" she asked carefully. Victor folded the letter with deliberate precision. "Thornwood Abbey, on the moors. It's remote." "How remote?" "The nearest village is 8 miles. The nearest town, 23. You'll have a housekeeper, a groundskeeper, and a cook. Sufficient staff for a household of 1. Eliza's pulse began to hammer. "You're not staying?" "I'll visit when business requires it." "When business?" She stopped, steadied herself. "I'm your wife." "You're an arrangement," Victor said, meeting her eyes. "A necessary fiction. The Crown has been pressuring me to marry for years, something about stability and succession and appearing less like a recluse. You've solved that problem. In return, you have a name, a roof, and an allowance. That was the bargain. You're exiling me. I'm placing you somewhere you'll be comfortable." "Comfortable," Eliza repeated, the word tasting like ashes. "Alone, in the middle of nowhere." "You'll adjust." She wanted to scream, to throw the basket at his head, to claw at the carriage door and hurl herself into the rain rather than endure another moment of this. But she didn't, because she'd learned another lesson in the past 3 weeks. Anger was a luxury, and she had none left to spend. "What if I refuse?" she asked instead. Victor's expression didn't change. "Then you'll return to London with nothing. No settlement, no support, no references. Your father's debts remain paid, of course. I'm not a complete bastard. But you'll face society as a woman who married a duke and abandoned him within hours. They'll assume madness or infidelity. Either way, you'll be ruined beyond repair." "I'm already ruined." "Not like that, you're not." He leaned forward, and for the first time Eliza saw something other than cold indifference in his face. Not cruelty exactly, but not kindness either. Something harder, more final. "Listen carefully," he said, You will go to Thornwood. You will live there quietly. You will not write letters to London gossips. You will not petition for my attention. You will not embarrass me. In exchange, you will have security, a home, money enough for books, music, whatever small pleasures you require. You will be fed, clothed, and protected from the world that chewed your father up and spit him out. And if I want more than that, then you're a fool. The carriage hit a rut, throwing Eliza against the side panel. She caught herself, tasted blood where she'd bitten her cheek. Victor straightened. We're nearly there. Thornwood Abbey rose from the moors like a broken tooth. Even in the gathering darkness, Eliza could see how wrong it was. The main structure, old stone, Tudor arches, sagged to one side, ivy strangling what remained of its former grandeur. The east wing was clearly abandoned, windows dark as empty eye sockets. The grounds were a tangle of dead bracken and wild gorse, no paths visible, no order. This wasn't an estate, it was a grave. The carriage stopped before a door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Victor climbed out, not bothering with an umbrella. Eliza followed, rain soaking through her dress within seconds. The door opened before they reached it. A woman stood in the threshold, 60 if she was a day, all sharp angles and sharper eyes. She wore black from collar to hem, her gray hair scraped back so tight it must have hurt. Your Grace, she said, curtsying to Victor. Mrs. Greer, this is the Duchess. See that she's settled. Of course, Your Grace. Victor turned to Eliza. For a moment she thought he might say something, offer some parting word that wasn't ice and business. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. Your allowance, he said, handing it to her. £50 quarterly. Don't spend it all on frivolity. Then he walked back to the carriage. Wait. Eliza started forward. You're leaving now? Tonight? I have business in Edinburgh. When will you return? Victor paused, one foot on the carriage step. The rain ran down his face, but he didn't seem to notice. When I need to, he said. And then he was gone. The carriage rolled away into the darkness, taking with it the last connection to anything Eliza had known. She stood there, clutching the allowance paper, water streaming from her hair, her dress, her hands. Come inside, Your Grace, Mrs. Greer said. Not unkindly, but not warmly either. Just stating a fact. You'll catch your death out here. Eliza followed her into Thornwood Abbey. The entry hall smelled of damp and neglect. A single candelabra provided light, its flames throwing long shadows across walls streaked with water damage. The floor, once fine parquet, was warped in places, buckling where rain had gotten in through cracks in the ceiling. The west wing is habitable, Mrs. Greer said, leading Eliza up a staircase that creaked with every step. The Duke had it aired out last week. Your bedroom is this way. They walked down a corridor lined with portraits so dark with age and grime that Eliza couldn't make out the faces. Doors stood ajar, revealing empty rooms stripped of furniture. One still had a child's toy in the corner, a wooden horse missing a leg. Who lived here before? Eliza asked. No one. Not for 30 years. Then why? Not my place to say, Your Grace. Mrs. Greer stopped at a door near the corridor's end and pushed it open. The bedroom beyond was adequate. A bed with clean linens, a wardrobe, a washstand, a single window looking out onto moorland so vast and empty it seemed to swallow the sky. Your trunks will arrive tomorrow, Mrs. Greer said. There's bread and butter in the kitchen if you're hungry. I sleep in the servants' quarters, south side, ground floor. Ring if you need me. She pointed to a bell pull that looked like it might come off the wall if touched. Mrs. Greer, Eliza said. May I ask you something? The housekeeper's expression remained neutral. Yes, Your Grace. Why did he bring me here? The truth. For a long moment, Mrs. Greer said nothing. Then, the Duke doesn't confide in me, Your Grace. But if I were to guess, I'd say he brought you here because it's where he puts things he doesn't want to think about. She curtsied, brief, efficient, and left. Eliza stood alone in the room that was now hers, not a bedroom in a grand estate, not a stepping stone to society, just a room, in a dying house, on the edge of nowhere. She walked to the window and pressed her palm against the cold glass. Outside, the moors stretched endlessly, black under black sky. No lights? No signs of life, just wind and rain and darkness. This was her marriage. This was her future. A contract signed, a bride delivered, a woman erased. Eliza let her forehead rest against the window. Her breath fogged the glass, then faded, then fogged again. You can't stop the storm, darling, but you can be the tree that bends and doesn't break. She'd bent so much already. She didn't know if there was anything left to bend with, but standing here, dripping rainwater onto floorboards that groaned under her weight, in a house that smelled like death and forgetting, Eliza made a decision. She wouldn't break. Not for him. Not for this. Not for any of it. If Victor Blackmore thought he could bury her here and forget her, he was wrong. She didn't know how yet. Didn't know what shape her resistance would take. But she knew this. She was done bending. Morning came cold and gray. Eliza woke to find her dress from yesterday draped over a chair, still damp. Someone, Mrs. Greer presumably, had left a tray on the washstand. Porridge, gone cold, tea, gone colder, bread that tasted like sawdust. She ate it anyway. Then she dressed in the only other clothes she had, a traveling dress she'd worn to London 3 weeks ago, back when she still thought there might be choices ahead of her, and went downstairs. The house looked worse in daylight. Water stains mapped the walls like countries on a globe of decay. The ceiling in the drawing room had partially collapsed, leaving a gaping hole through which Eliza could see sky. Furniture sat under sheets so thick with dust they looked like snowdrifts. She found Mrs. Greer in the kitchen, scrubbing a pot with methodical violence. "Good morning," Eliza said. Mrs. Greer glanced up. "Your Grace, I trust you slept well?" "Well enough. Could I ask for some hot water for washing?" "I'll have it brought up." "Thank you." Eliza hesitated. "Mrs. Greer, you mentioned a cook and a groundskeeper." "Aye? Mr. Sowerby handles the grounds. Mrs. Cowan does the cooking when she's not laid up with her joints. She's 68 and shouldn't be working, but His Grace doesn't see fit to hire additional staff." "I see. And how long have you been at Thornwood?" 3 months. The Duke hired me specifically for your arrival." So she was new too. No old retainer who knew the house's secrets then. "Mrs. Greer, I'd like to see the rest of the estate. All of it. Would you walk me through?" The housekeeper set down her pot. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but there's not much to see. Most of it's in ruins." "I'd like to see it anyway." Something shifted in Mrs. Greer's expression. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps the beginning of respect. "As you wish," she said. They spent 3 hours walking Thornwood's corpse. The east wing was uninhabitable, roof caved in, floors rotted through. The stables housed no horses, just rats and the ghost of hay long since decomposed. The garden was a wilderness of dead roses and brambles so thick Eliza couldn't see where paths had once been. "What happened here?" Eliza asked as they stood in what might have been a conservatory once. Glass panels now shattered, plants reclaimed by wildness. "Fire," Mrs. Greer said. 32 years ago, the Duke's family perished. His parents, his sister. He was 6 years old, the only survivor. Eliza turned to stare at her. "He lived here? As a child?" "Until the fire. After, he was sent to boarding school, then university. Never came back. Not until he inherited the title at 21, and even then he only visited once to sign papers transferring management to a steward. The steward died 8 years ago. No one's maintained the property since." The pieces began to fit together, forming a picture Eliza didn't want to see. Victor hadn't sent her here randomly. He'd sent her to the place where his family burned, to the place he'd spent 32 years trying to forget. "Why would he do this?" Eliza whispered. Mrs. Greer's mouth pressed into a thin line. "That's between you and His Grace, I expect." That night, alone in her room, Eliza lit every candle she could find and sat down with the allowance paper Victor had given her. £50 quarterly, £200 a year. It was more than she'd ever had access to in her life. Her father had kept her on pin money, £5 a quarter if she was lucky. But it wasn't enough to leave. Not really. Not if she wanted to survive more than a few months in London without references, without connections, without anyone to vouch for her. She was trapped. But trapped didn't mean helpless. Eliza pulled out a sheet of writing paper from the small desk in the corner and began to make a list. Immediate needs. Warmer clothes. Winter is coming. Proper food. Can't live on porridge. Books. Will go mad without them. Medium term. Repair the roof, at least over habitable sections. Clear the garden, something to do with my hands. Understand this place. Why here? Why me? Long term. She stared at the question mark for a long time. What was her long term? Wait for Victor to visit? Hope he'd eventually feel guilty? Pray he'd release her from this marriage and let her start over somewhere else? No. She'd spent 22 years waiting for men to decide her fate. Her father's creditors. Now Victor. She was done waiting. But what else was there? The candles burned lower as Eliza sat in the dark, listening to the wind scream across the moors. Somewhere in the ruined east wing, something crashed, a beam giving way, probably, or a window finally surrendering to time. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice it happening, an idea began to form. It was insane, probably impossible, but it was hers. If Victor wanted to forget her here, fine. She'd give him something he couldn't forget. She'd take this dying estate, this grave he'd tried to bury her in, and she'd bring it back to life. Not for him, for herself. Because if she was going to be the Duchess of Thornwood, exiled to the edge of nowhere, then she'd be a duchess who mattered. Even if the only people who knew were 3 elderly servants and whatever ghosts haunted these halls. Eliza picked up her pen and wrote one more line. Long term, make him regret underestimating me. Then she blew out the candles and went to bed. Outside, the moors howled, but inside, for the first time since the wedding, Eliza Blackmore smiled. The first battle came 3 days later, and it wasn't with the moors or the weather. It was with Mrs. Cowan. Eliza found her in the kitchen, a bent woman with knuckles like walnuts, hands wrapped in strips of cloth, trying to lift a pot of water onto the stove. "Let me help," Eliza said, reaching for the handle. Mrs. Cowan jerked back like she'd been scalded. "No, Your Grace, not proper. It's just a pot. It's my job." "Your hands are shaking." "They always shake." Mrs. Cowan's jaw set. "I can manage." She lifted the pot with visible effort, water sloshing over the rim, hissing against the hot iron. Eliza watched her struggle, every instinct screaming to intervene, but she held back. Barely. When the pot was finally settled, Mrs. Cowan wiped her forehead with the back of one cloth-wrapped hand and turned to face Eliza properly. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but the kitchen's no place for a duchess, Mrs. Greer would have my head if she knew you were down here. Mrs. Greer doesn't need to know. She knows everything that happens in this house." Eliza pulled out a stool and sat. "Then she'll know I'm here by choice. Mrs. Cowan, I need to ask you something. How much food do we have stored for winter?" The cook's eyes narrowed. "Enough." "How much is enough?" "Why would Your Grace need to know such things?" "Because I live here now, and I'd like to understand how this household runs." Mrs. Cowan turned back to her pot, adding what looked like turnips and some kind of gray meat. "We've got flour, dried beans, some salted pork, potatoes in the cellar, though half of them are rotting. The Duke sends a wagon from Edinburgh every 2 months with supplies. Last one came a week before you arrived." "So we're set until January?" "If we're careful." Eliza watched the woman work, noting the way she favored her left hand, the careful deliberation of each movement. Arthritis, clearly, bad enough that every task was a small war. "What would you need," Eliza asked carefully, "to make this kitchen run better?" Mrs. Cowan stopped stirring. "Are you asking me?" "I am." A long pause, then, "A girl, someone young with strong hands, to do the heavy lifting, the washing up, and a proper pantry door. The current one's swollen shut, so half the time I can't get to the stores without Mr. Sowerby's help." She hesitated. "And maybe new pots. These are older than I am, and they leak." Eliza pulled out the small notebook she'd started carrying. "Anything else?" Mrs. Cowan stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Your Grace, I've worked in great houses my whole life. Nobody's ever asked me what I need." "I'm asking." The cook's expression softened, just slightly. A better stove. This one eats coal like a demon and barely gets hot. But that's a big expense. Write it all down, Eliza said, tearing out a page from her notebook. Everything. Don't hold back. She left Mrs. Cowan standing in the kitchen, still holding the spoon, looking at the paper like it might explode. Mr. Sowerby was harder to find. Eliza finally tracked him to the remains of the garden, hacking at a tangle of blackberry canes with a rusted scythe. He was perhaps 70, broad-shouldered despite his age, with a face like weathered stone. Mr. Sowerby? He didn't look up. Aye. I'm the Duchess. I know who you are. The scythe swung again, severing canes thick as Eliza's wrist. I'd like to discuss the grounds with you. Not much to discuss. Everything's dead or dying. What would it take to fix it? That got his attention. He straightened, leaning on the scythe handle. Fix what? The garden? The stables? The east wing? All of it? Start with what's possible. Mr. Sowerby spat into the dirt. Nothing's possible without money, Your Grace. And begging your pardon, but I've been here 3 months and haven't seen a penny for repairs. How much would you need? For the garden, at least. He studied her, eyes sharp beneath bushy gray brows. You're serious. I am. The garden alone? He scratched his chin. 20 pounds? Maybe 25. For decent tools, seeds, someone to help me clear the worst of it. The brambles have gone wild. You'd need 3 strong men working a week just to cut them back. Eliza did the math. 25 pounds was half her quarterly allowance. What about the roof? Mr. Sowerby laughed, a harsh barking sound. The roof? Your Grace, the roof's a disaster. Would take a crew of 6 minimum. Good slate doesn't come cheap. You're looking at 2, maybe 300 pounds. And that's just for the west wing. 300 pounds. More than she'd see in a year and a half. What if we just patch it? Enough to stop the worst leaks? His expression shifted. Not quite respect, but something adjacent. Patching, that might be doable. 50, 60 pounds if we're clever about it. Use cheaper materials, do the work ourselves. Could you do it? The work? I'm a groundskeeper, not a roofer, but I've mended a barn or 2 in my day. Would need help, though. Eliza wrote it all down. Garden, 25 pounds, roof repairs, 60 pounds. That was already more than her quarterly allowance, and she hadn't even addressed the kitchen yet. Mr. Sowerby, she said slowly, if I gave you a budget, a real one, what would you prioritize? He considered this, then pointed with the scythe. See that wall? Runs along the north side. It's crumbling. Sheep from the neighboring land keep getting in, tearing up what little grass we've got. Fix that first. Then the garden. Can't grow food if animals eat it faster than it sprouts. After that, the roof. Then maybe the stables if we ever get horses again. He paused. But, Your Grace, no offense, where's this budget coming from? The Duke made it clear we're to make do with what we have. Let me worry about the Duke. Mr. Sowerby's eyebrows rose. You'll forgive me for saying this, but you don't strike me as the type His Grace listens to. You're probably right, but he's not here, is he? The old man's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. Hard to tell. No, Your Grace, he's not, son. That night, Eliza sat at the desk in her room and laid out the numbers. Quarterly allowance, 50 pounds. Kitchen needs, approximately 15 pounds. Girls' wages for 3 months. New pots. Door repair. Garden, 25 pounds. Roof, 60 pounds. Wall repair. Mr. Sowerby estimated 30 pounds. Total, 130 pounds. She had 50. The deficit stared back at her like a taunt. But there was another number in her ledger, the one she'd been avoiding. When her father's estate had been liquidated, there had been one item the creditors couldn't touch. A trust her mother had set up before she died, meant for Eliza's future. It held 120 pounds. Not much, but it was hers, legally protected from her father's debts, from Victor's control. She'd been saving it. For what? She wasn't sure. Escape? Maybe. A rainy day. This was that rainy day. Eliza dipped her pen and began writing letters. The first to her father's old solicitor, instructing him to release the trust funds and transfer them to her account in the village, assuming Thornwood even had a bank. The second to Victor, informing him of her plans to make improvements to the estate. She kept it brief, formal. Didn't ask permission, just stated facts. The third to Mrs. Greer, requesting a meeting first thing in the morning. She sealed them all, then sat back and stared at the pile of paper and wax. This was insane. She was about to spend everything she had, her entire safety net, on a house that wasn't hers, in a marriage that was a farce for people she barely knew. But if she didn't do it, what was the alternative? Sit here for the next 40 years watching Thornwood collapse around her? Become a ghost in a dead house, waiting for a husband who'd made it clear he never wanted to see her again? No. If she was going to be buried here, she'd at least dig her own grave. Mrs. Greer took the news about as well as Eliza expected. "You want to hire a kitchen maid," the housekeeper repeated slowly, like the words didn't make sense in that order. "Yes. And repair the roof. The worst sections, yes. And rebuild the garden wall. Mr. Sowerby says sheep keep getting in." Mrs. Greer sat down. She never sat in Eliza's presence, too aware of propriety, but she sat now, hands folded in her lap, face carefully blank. "Your Grace," she said finally, "these are decisions the Duke would need to approve. The Duke isn't here. He provides your allowance. And I'm choosing how to spend it. On the estate, not on yourself. The estate is where I live. Improving it improves my life." Mrs. Greer's mouth pressed into a line. "The Duke sent you here to be comfortable, not to play landlord." "The Duke sent me here to be forgotten," Eliza corrected. "But I'm still the Duchess. This is still my home, legally. And unless he's written something in our marriage contract that says I can't hire staff or fix a leaking roof, I'm going to do it. He won't like it. Then he can come tell me himself." They stared at each other across the desk. Mrs. Greer broke first. Not surrender exactly, but a kind of weary resignation. "You'll need permission from the parish to hire local," she said. "And good luck finding a girl willing to come this far out. Most folks think Thornwood's cursed." "Is it?" "A family burned to death here, Your Grace. The house sat empty for 3 decades. If that's not cursed, I don't know what is." Eliza leaned back in her chair. "Then we'll pay better than anyone else. Word will spread. You're spending money you don't have." "I'm spending money I do have, just not the money Victor gave me." Mrs. Greer's eyes sharpened. "You have your own funds. A small trust. It's mine to use as I see fit. And you're using it on this." Not a question. "Yes." The housekeeper was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, smoothing her skirts with hands that shook just slightly. "I've worked for the nobility my entire life," she said. "I've seen duchesses who spend £1,000 on a single gown and don't know the names of their own servants. I've seen women who'd rather die than set foot in a kitchen." She met Eliza's eyes. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Your Grace. I haven't decided which. Can I be both?" Mrs. Greer almost smiled. "Almost. I'll make inquiries about a kitchen maid, and I'll write to the builders in Hexham about the roof. But, Your Grace, when the Duke finds out, and he will, this will fall on your head, not mine." "I know. And you're prepared for that." Eliza thought about the wedding, the carriage ride, the cold dismissal, the way Victor had looked at her like she was a problem solved, a box ticked, nothing more. "Let him come," she said. "I'm not afraid of my husband." It was a lie, but Mrs. Greer didn't call her on it. The builders arrived 2 weeks later, 3 men from Hexham, suspicious and tight-lipped until Eliza showed them her money. "We'll need a week," the foreman said, squinting at the roof. "Maybe 10 days if the weather turns." "You have 8, Eliza told him. "After that, I can't afford to keep you." They worked in silence, hauling slate and timber up ladders that looked ready to collapse under the weight. Eliza watched from below, heart in her throat every time one of them leaned too far over the edge. Mr. Sowerby started on the wall with help from 2 boys from the village, brothers, 15 and 17, who'd agreed to work for £1 a day each. They were terrified of Eliza at first, wouldn't meet her eyes, but by the 3rd day they were joking with Mr. Sowerby and eating the bread Mrs. Cowan left out for them. The kitchen maid arrived on a Tuesday. Her name was Annie, 16, red-haired, so thin Eliza could see her collarbones through her dress. Mrs. Greer had found her in the village workhouse, an orphan with no prospects and a desperate need for wages. "She'll work hard," Mrs. Greer said, "or I'll send her back." Annie proved her right. The girl was up before dawn, hauling water, scrubbing pots, chopping vegetables with hands that moved twice as fast as Mrs. Cowan's stiff fingers. She didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't complain, didn't ask questions. Eliza liked her immediately. "Annie," she said one morning, finding the girl on her knees scrubbing the kitchen floor, "when you're finished with that, come find me. I want to show you where we keep the linens." Annie looked up, eyes wide. "Me, Your Grace? You're staff now. You should know where everything is." "But I'm just a maid." "You're my maid. That means you matter." Annie's face did something complicated. Then she ducked her head and went back to scrubbing, but her hands moved a little slower, a little less frantic. That night, Mrs. Cowan pulled Eliza aside. "The girl's eating again," she said quietly. "First time I've seen her take seconds." "Good. She thinks you're going to throw her out." "Why would I do that?" "Because that's what nobles do, Your Grace. They hire you, work you until you drop, then toss you when you're no longer useful." Eliza met her eyes. "I'm not other nobles." Mrs. Cowan studied her, then nodded once. "No, I don't suppose you are." The letter from Victor arrived on a Thursday, delivered by a courier who refused to stay the night despite the gathering storm. Eliza opened it in the drawing room, hands steady. "Eliza, I've received word from my steward in Edinburgh that you've hired staff and begun repairs at Thornwood without my approval. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you will cease immediately. The estate is not yours to manage. Your role is to live quietly and avoid creating problems. I expect confirmation of your compliance by return post. V. Blackmore." Eliza read it twice, but then she walked to the fireplace and fed it to the flames. She wrote her reply that night, keeping it even shorter than his. "Victor, I have hired a kitchen maid, repaired the roof, and begun work on the garden wall. The improvements are necessary and funded by my personal resources. I require no permission to make my home livable. If you take issue with this, you are welcome to return and discuss it in person. E. Blackmore." She sealed it with wax, his family crest, the raven, and crown, and gave it to Mr. Sowerby to post the next morning. "Should I wait for a response?" he asked. "No need. There won't be one." She was wrong. Victor's second letter came a week later, twice as long and 3 times as angry. "You forget yourself. Thornwood is mine, purchased with my money, maintained at my discretion. Whatever funds you possess are yours to waste as you see fit, but you will not use them to undermine my authority over my own property. I gave you shelter when you had nothing. I erased your father's debts. I provided you with security and respectability. In return, I asked only that you remain quiet and unobtrusive. You have proven yourself incapable of either. Cease your improvements immediately, or I will cut off your allowance entirely. You will live on whatever scraps your personal resources can provide, and we will see how long your rebellion lasts. This is your final warning." Eliza read it standing in the kitchen, Mrs. Greer watching her face. "Bad news, Your Grace?" "Threats. From the Duke? Who else?" She handed the letter to Mrs. Greer, who read it with the kind of careful neutrality that came from years of service. "He means it," the housekeeper said finally, "about the allowance." "I know. Can you survive without it?" Eliza did the math in her head. The trust was nearly depleted, £40 left, maybe less once the builders were paid in full. Her quarterly allowance was due in 6 weeks. If Victor cut her off, she'd be destitute by spring. "I don't know," she admitted. Mrs. Greer folded the letter with precise creases. "Then perhaps it's time to write back. Apologize. Tell him you'll stop." "No." "Your Grace, I'm not apologizing for making this place livable. I'm not apologizing for giving Annie a job or fixing a roof that was caving in. And I'm certainly not apologizing for existing in a way that inconveniences him. He'll cut you off. Then I'll find another way." "There is no other way." Mrs. Greer's composure cracked, just for a moment. "You're a woman alone in the middle of nowhere. You have no family, no friends, no connections. If the Duke abandons you, you'll have nothing. You'll be right back where you started." Eliza set the letter on the table between them. I was nothing when I arrived here, she said quietly. A transaction. A problem solved. He didn't even stay the night after our wedding, just dropped me at the door and left. She looked at Mrs. Greer. I've spent 3 months turning this dying house into something that resembles a home. I've given 3 people jobs who desperately needed them. I fixed things that were broken. If that's rebellion, then I'm a rebel. You're a fool. Maybe, but I'd rather be a fool with a purpose than a ghost with none. Mrs. Greer said nothing for a long time. Then she picked up the letter and handed it back to Eliza. What will you write? Eliza smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. The truth. Victor. You gave me shelter in a house no one has lived in for 30 years. You erased debts I didn't create. You provided respectability that came with complete isolation. You did not give me a marriage. You did not give me a partner. You gave me a cage and told me to be grateful for the bars. I have made Thornwood livable because you did not. I have hired staff because the ones you provided are elderly and overworked. I have repaired what was broken because you abandoned it decades ago and never looked back. Cut off my allowance if you wish. I'll manage. I always have. But if you truly want me to stop, you'll have to come here and tell me yourself. I suspect you won't. E. She didn't wait for his reply this time. Winter came early that year. By December, the moors were locked in frost, wind howling through the valleys like something alive and angry. The repairs held, barely. The roof no longer leaked, though it groaned under the weight of snow. The garden wall was finished, stones mortared tight against the weather. Annie proved invaluable, not just in the kitchen, but everywhere, mending linens, stoking fires, keeping the west wing warm enough that Eliza didn't wake to ice inside the windows. Mrs. Cowan taught Eliza how to cook, not fancy dishes, but practical ones, stews that stretched ingredients, bread that actually rose, preserves that wouldn't spoil. Eliza's first attempt at pastry was a disaster. Her second was edible. By her fifth, Mrs. Cowan was nodding approval. You've got the hands for it, the cook said. Light touch. That's rarer than you'd think. Mr. Sowerby started planning the spring garden, sketching layouts on scraps of paper by the kitchen fire. He wanted vegetables, practical crops, but Eliza insisted on flowers too. What's the point of flowers? He grumbled. Beauty, Eliza said. Even here. He muttered something about impractical nobles, but when she checked his sketches later, he'd added a section for roses. The trust money ran out in January. Eliza sat at her desk, ledger open, staring at the final entry, £3, 7 shillings. It wasn't enough for anything. The quarterly allowance was due in 2 weeks. If Victor had cut her off. She closed the ledger and went downstairs. Mrs. Greer was in the kitchen with Mrs. Cowan and Annie, the 3 of them working in comfortable silence. They looked up when Eliza entered. Your Grace? I need to tell you something. She explained the situation, the trust, the depleted funds, the probability, that Victor had made good on his threat. When she finished, Mrs. Greer's face was stone. So we might not be paid come February. I don't know, but I wanted you to know now so you could make other arrangements if needed. Annie looked stricken. Mrs. Cowan just sighed. Other arrangements, the cook said. As if there's anywhere to go. I'll pay you what I owe, Eliza said quickly. I just don't know about future wages. Mrs. Greer stood. With all due respect, Your Grace, what did you think would happen? You defied the Duke. You spent your own money. Now you're broke and likely cut off, and we're all in the same boat. I know, I'm sorry, I should have... Should have what? Stayed quiet? Let the roof collapse? Let us work ourselves to death for a man who doesn't even visit? Eliza blinked. I thought you'd be angry. I am angry. Mrs. Greer's mouth quirked. But not at you. She looked at Mrs. Cowan and Annie. What do you say? Do we abandon ship, or do we see this through? Mrs. Cowan snorted. I'm 68 years old. Where am I going? Annie's voice was small but steady. I've got nowhere else, Your Grace. If you'll have me, I'll stay. Mrs. Greer nodded. Then it's settled. We'll manage. We've made it this far on scraps and stubbornness. A few more months won't kill us. Eliza felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking. Opening. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank us yet, Mrs. Greer said. Thank us when we're still here come spring. Chesek. The quarterly allowance didn't come. February 1st arrived, then the 5th, then the 10th. No courier, no letter, no money. Eliza wrote to the bank in the village. They confirmed. The Duke had closed her account. She was officially destitute. That night, she gathered everyone in the kitchen. We have enough food for 6 weeks if we're careful, she said. After that, we'll need to figure something out. We could sell things, Annie suggested. Furniture, paintings. Well, the furniture's mostly ruined, Mr. Sowerby said, and the paintings are probably worth less than firewood. What about the village? Mrs. Cowan asked. Could we take in washing, mending? Eliza considered this. It's possible, but we'd need to reach people first, and I don't know how willing they'd be to hire staff from the cursed estate. I'll go, Annie said suddenly. I'm from the village. They know me. If I tell them we're decent folk, they might listen. It was worth a try. They sent Annie into the village the next morning with a bundle of mended shirts, practice work to show their skill. She returned that evening with 2 shillings and a promise of more work. Mrs. Fletcher needs help with her linens, Annie reported, and the rector's wife wants someone to alter her dresses. She's gotten stouter. Won't say why. She grinned. I told them our Duchess does beautiful needlework. Eliza stared at her. You told them I'd... You do, don't you? I've seen you mending your own things. Tiny stitches, real neat. It wasn't a lie. Eliza had been sewing since she was a child, necessity, not hobby. Her father couldn't afford a lady's maid in the final years. I suppose I could try. They built a small business that way. Mending, washing, sewing. Word spread slowly. The Duchess of Thornwood wasn't above honest work. Some villagers thought it scandalous. Others found it oddly inspiring. The money was terrible. A few shillings here, maybe a pound there, but it was enough to buy flour, salt, candles. They survived, barely. By March, Eliza had worn through the knees of both her everyday dresses and was considering cutting them down into skirts. Mrs. Greer's shoes had holes. Annie's hands were raw from washing other people's laundry in freezing water. But they survived. And Thornwood, against all odds, began to feel less like a grave and more like something alive. Then, on a night when the wind screamed loud enough to wake the dead, someone pounded on the front door. Eliza was in the drawing room, mending by candlelight. She set down her needle and went to answer. No one visited Thornwood, not in winter, not ever. She opened the door. A man stood there, soaked through, shaking with cold or pain or both. His coat was expensive but ruined. His face was pale as death. Help, he rasped. Please. Then he collapsed at her feet. Eliza knelt beside him, rolling him over. Dark hair, gray eyes, a scar she didn't remember on his cheek. Victor. Her husband had returned. For 3 seconds, Eliza didn't move. She stood there, door still open, wind tearing through the entry hall, staring at the man who'd abandoned her 8 months ago like she was cargo he'd paid to store. Victor Blackmore. Duke. Husband. The man who'd cut off her money and told her to be grateful for a cage, now bleeding on her doorstep. Mrs. Greer! Eliza's voice cut through the wind. Annie, I need help! They came running, Mrs. Greer with a lamp, Annie wide-eyed and pale. Mr. Sowerby appeared from the back corridor, still in his coat from checking the stables. Is that... Mrs. Greer stopped dead. Sweet mercy, it's the Duke. Help me get him inside. Between the 4 of them, they dragged Victor into the entry hall and kicked the door shut against the storm. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight, his breathing shallow and rapid. Get him to the drawing room, Eliza said. There's a fire there. Annie, bring blankets. Mrs. Greer, hot water and clean cloths. Mr. Sowerby, I'll fetch the doctor from the village. In this weather, you'll die before you make it half a mile. Mr. Sowerby's jaw set. Then what do you suggest, Your Grace? Eliza looked down at Victor. His face was gray, lips almost blue. Blood soaked through his coat on the left side, spreading dark across the expensive wool. We do it ourselves, she said. They carried him to the drawing room and laid him on the sofa, the only piece of furniture that wasn't falling apart. Eliza knelt beside him, hands already working at the buttons of his coat. Your Grace, Mrs. Greer said carefully, perhaps I should... I've dressed wounds before. Not entirely true. She'd helped the housekeeper at Hawthorne Manor once when a stable boy had been kicked by a horse, but close enough. Just get me what I asked for, Mrs. Us. Greer hesitated, then nodded and left. Eliza peeled back Victor's coat. The shirt beneath was ruined, soaked red. She found the wound, a gash along his ribs, deep but not immediately fatal. Something sharp. A blade, probably. What happened to you? She murmured. Victor's eyes cracked open. Unfocused. He didn't seem to see her. Fire, he whispered. The fire? There's no fire. You're at Thornwood. They're burning, all of them. I can hear. Victor. She gripped his shoulder. Look at me. His eyes found hers. Recognition flickered, then confusion. Eliza? Yes. You're here. It's my home. You put me here, remember? He tried to sit up, gasped in pain, fell back. No, not safe. You have to. The fire. There is no fire. Her voice came out sharper than intended. She forced herself to breathe. You're delirious. You've lost blood. Now hold still so I can stop you from bleeding out on my furniture. Annie arrived with blankets, Mrs. Greer with water and cloths. Together they cut away Victor's shirt. Eliza had to use the kitchen shears, hands shaking despite her best efforts, and exposed the wound fully. It was bad. Not mortal, but bad. The kind of injury that needed stitches and prayer and a real doctor. They had none of those things. Mrs. Cowan, Eliza called toward the kitchen. Do we have any spirits? Brandy? Whiskey? Anything strong? The cook appeared in the doorway. There's cooking wine. Bring it, and thread. The strongest we have. Mrs. Cowan's eyes widened. You're going to sew him up? Unless you have a better idea. Your Grace, I've stitched meat pies, not people. Then I'll do it myself. She'd never sewn flesh before, but she'd sewn everything else. Fabric, leather, even the torn ear of a barn cat once. How different could it be? Very different, as it turned out. The first stitch made Victor scream, a raw animal sound that sent ice down Eliza's spine. He thrashed, and it took both Mr. Sowerby and Mrs. Greer to hold him down. Keep him still, Eliza said, voice steadier than she felt. He's in agony, Mrs. Greer said. He'll be dead if I don't finish this. She worked as fast as she dared, needle pushing through skin that resisted, thread pulling tight. Blood kept welling up, making it hard to see. Her hands were slick with it. Victor had stopped screaming, but he was shaking now, teeth chattering, eyes rolled back. Talk to him, Eliza told Annie. Keep him conscious. Annie knelt by Victor's head, her young face terrified but determined. Your Grace, can you hear me? You're going to be fine. The Duchess is fixing you up. You're at Thornwood. You're safe. Not safe, Victor mumbled. Never safe. They burned. Everyone burned. Who burned? Eliza asked, tying off another stitch. My family, my sister. She was 6. I heard her screaming. Eliza's hand stilled for half a second. She remembered what Mrs. Greer had told her, the fire, 32 years ago. Victor had been 6 when his family died. That was a long time ago, she said quietly. I can still hear her, every night, screaming. She's not screaming now. You're safe. Nowhere's safe. That's why you couldn't. He tried to focus on Eliza's face. I sent you away. To protect you. You sent me away because you didn't want a wife. No, because everyone I love dies. The words hung in the air like smoke. Eliza finished the last stitch in silence. By the time she was done, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely tie off the thread. Mrs. Greer took over, cleaning the wound with the cooking wine, which made Victor hiss but didn't wake him fully, and bandaging it with strips torn from old linens. He needs rest, the housekeeper said, and a proper doctor as soon as the storm breaks. We can't move him upstairs, not yet. Then he'll have to stay here. Mrs. Greer looked at the sofa, then at Eliza. You should rest too, Your Grace. You look ready to collapse. I'm fine. You're covered in blood. Eliza looked down. Her dress, already worn thin from months of hard use, was ruined. Blood on the sleeves, the bodice, even the hem where she'd been kneeling. I'll change later. Right now I need to know what happened to him. She went through Victor's coat pockets. Found a letter, water-damaged but readable. An ambush on the road from Edinburgh. Bandits, or maybe something worse. The details were vague, but the intent was clear. Someone had tried to kill him. "Why would anyone want him dead?" Annie asked, peering over Eliza's shoulder. "He's a duke," Mrs. Greer said flatly. "Rich, powerful, no heirs. Plenty of people would benefit from his death." Eliza folded the letter and tucked it away. "Did he come alone?" "Must have," Mr. Sowerby said from the doorway. "There's no carriage, no horse that I can see, just tracks in the mud leading to the door. He walked here." "From where?" "Can't tell in this weather, but he's bleeding through his coat, so he couldn't have come far. Maybe a mile. 2 at most." Which meant Victor had been stabbed, escaped somehow, and walked through a storm to reach Thornwood. Not to Kent, where his main estate was. Not to Edinburgh, where he had business. Here, to the place he'd sworn never to return to. "Why?" Eliza whispered. No one had an answer. Victor didn't wake for 2 days. Eliza kept watch in shifts with Mrs. Greer, changing his bandages, forcing water between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow. He thrashed sometimes, mumbling about fire and screaming and someone named Catherine, his sister, Eliza realized. The fever came on the second night. Victor burned like he was being consumed from the inside, sweat soaking through the blankets. Eliza stayed beside him, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, murmuring things she didn't remember later. "Don't you dare die," she told him at one point, when his breathing went shallow and she thought she was losing him. "I didn't spend 8 months surviving this place just to watch you give up now." His eyes opened, barely, unfocused. "Eliza," he whispered, "I'm here. I'm sorry." "Save it. You can apologize when you're not delirious." "No. Need to—" He coughed, body shaking with the effort. "Need to tell you. The fire. I was hiding, in the closet. I could have, if I'd been braver. You were 6 years old. I should have saved them. You survived. That's what children do. They survive." His hand found hers, grip weak but desperate. "Everyone I care about dies." "Not everyone. Not yet." "You will. If I won't." She squeezed his hand. "I'm harder to kill than I look." He almost smiled. Then the fever pulled him under again. On the third morning, it broke. Eliza woke. She'd fallen asleep in the chair beside the sofa, to find Victor watching her. His eyes were clear for the first time since he'd arrived. "You stayed," he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "Where else would I go? I cut off your allowance. I noticed. I threatened you." "You did." He closed his eyes. "You should have let me die." "Don't be dramatic. The wound wasn't that bad. You stitched me up yourself. We didn't have a doctor. You could have sent for one. In that storm, Mr. Sowerby would have died trying." Victor's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. "Since when do you care if my servants die?" "They're my servants too, legally." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Are you hungry?" "No." "Thirsty?" "No." "Then what do you need?" He looked at her for a long moment. "An explanation?" "For what?" "Why you defied me. Why you spent your own money on this place. Why you're still here when you could have left months ago." Eliza sat back down, folding her hands in her lap. "Where would I go? You made sure I had no options. You had your trust. Had. Past tense. I spent it fixing your roof and feeding your staff." "My staff," Victor repeated. "Not yours." "Ours, then. Does the distinction matter?" "It does when you're acting like the lady of the manor without my permission." "I am the lady of the manor. I'm your wife." "In name only." "Whose fault is that?" The question sat between them like a live coal. Victor looked away first. "I told you the terms. I was clear about what this marriage was." "A transaction. Yes. You've made that abundantly clear." Eliza leaned forward. "But here's the thing about transactions, Victor. They require both parties to hold up their end. You promised me security. A home. What you gave me was a prison sentence in a house you couldn't bear to look at. I gave you more than your father ever did." That's not the high bar you think it is. He almost laughed. The sound turned into a cough, and he pressed a hand to his ribs, wincing. Don't move, Eliza said. You'll tear the stitches. Your stitches. Yes, my stitches. In your flesh. Which means you owe me at least a conversation. Victor settled back against the cushions. What do you want to know? Why you came here? Why not your estate in Kent? Why Thornwood? His jaw tightened. I wasn't thinking clearly. Try again. I was dying. I needed shelter. You were 2 days' ride from Edinburgh, 1 day from a dozen estates belonging to people who actually like you. But you came here. To the place you haven't set foot in for 30 years. The place you sent me to forget me. She held his gaze. Why? Victor was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because it was the only place I knew you'd be. The admission hung in the air between them. Eliza sat back slowly. You wanted me to find you. I wanted... He stopped. Started again. When I was on the ground, bleeding, thinking I'd die in the mud like a dog, the only thing I could think about was this place. And you. Here. Alone. And if I died, you'd never know. You'd just wait, wondering when I'd come back, if I'd come back. He looked at her. I didn't want you to wonder. How considerate. Eliza? No. She stood. You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up half dead and suddenly care about what I think or feel. You spent 8 months treating me like furniture, like something you could store and forget. And now what? You had a near-death experience and decided I'm worth remembering? It's not like that. Then what is it like? Victor tried to sit up, gasped, gave up. You want the truth? Fine, I'm a bastard. I have been since I was 6 years old and watched my family burn to death while I hid in a closet. I learned early that caring about people gets them killed. So I stopped caring. About anyone. About anything except staying alive. And me? You were supposed to be easy. A wife on paper. A solution to a political problem. I'd give you money, you'd stay out of my way, and we'd both get what we needed. Except I didn't stay out of your way. No, you didn't. He met her eyes. You took the worst place I could think of and made it better. You hired staff I'd neglected, fixed problems I'd ignored, and when I threatened you, you told me to come say it to my face. His mouth quirked. No one's ever done that before. Maybe they should have. Maybe. Eliza crossed her arms. So what now? You apologize? Promise to be better? Give me my allowance back and pretend the last 8 months didn't happen? I don't know. At least he was honest. She turned toward the door. Get some rest. We'll talk more when you're stronger. Eliza. She stopped but didn't turn around. Thank you, Victor said quietly, for not letting me die. I didn't do it for you, Eliza said. I did it because I'm not the kind of person who lets people bleed out on my doorstep, even if they deserve it. She left him there and didn't look back. The storm broke on the 3rd day. Victor was strong enough to sit up by then, though Mrs. Greer scolded him every time he tried to do more. Eliza kept her distance, throwing herself into work, mending clothes, planning the spring garden, anything to avoid the drawing room. But avoidance only worked for so long. She found him in the kitchen on the 4th day, arguing with Mrs. Cowan about breakfast. I don't need coddling, he was saying, just porridge. You need more than porridge. You've lost half your blood. I'm fine. You're stubborn, is what you are. Eliza cleared her throat. They both turned. Your Grace, Mrs. Cowan said, relief evident. Tell him he needs proper food. He's a grown man. He can decide for himself. Eliza poured herself tea. Though Mrs. Cowan's right, you look terrible. Victor's eyebrows rose. Thank you. Just an observation. Mrs. Cowan muttered something about impossible nobles and went back to her stove. Victor watched Eliza with an expression she couldn't quite read. You've been avoiding me, he said. I've been busy. Doing what? Running your estate, since you're in no condition to do it yourself. It's not my... He stopped. I suppose it is, isn't it? My estate? My responsibility. Legally, yes. He looked around the kitchen. Really looked, noting the clean floors, the organized shelves, the new pots hanging by the stove. You did all this? with help. Mrs. Cowan, Annie, Mr. Sowerby, even Mrs. Greer, though she'd never admit it, on 50 pounds a quarter. On nothing, actually, after you cut me off. Eliza sipped her tea. We managed. How? Mending, sewing, taking in washing from the village, whatever work we could find. Victor stared at her. You took in washing? Yes. You're a duchess. I'm also broke. Desperate times. I could have... He stopped. I should have listened. When you wrote about the improvements, I thought you were being frivolous, spending money on nonsense. The roof was caving in. I know that now. Do you? Eliza set down her cup. Because from where I'm standing, you knew it 8 months ago and didn't care. You sent me here to rot in a house you couldn't face, and when I tried to make it livable, you punished me for it. I was protecting you. From what? From me! The words came out harsh, raw. Victor's hand went to his ribs and he breathed through the pain. Everyone I care about dies, Eliza. My family burned. My closest friend at university drowned. A woman I nearly married, she got sick and was dead within a month. So I stopped caring, stopped letting people close. It was safer that way. Safer for who? For everyone. That's the most self-centered thing I've ever heard. Victor's head snapped up. Excuse me? You heard me. Eliza leaned against the counter. You think you're protecting people by pushing them away? You're not. You're just making yourself feel better about being alone. Bad things happen, Victor. People die. Houses burn. That's life. But hiding from it doesn't make you noble. It makes you a coward. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Then Victor laughed. Actually laughed. A rusty sound, like he'd forgotten how. A coward, he repeated. You just called a duke a coward to his face. Are you going to have me arrested? I'm considering it. Mrs. Cowan cleared her throat loudly. If you two are going to fight, do it somewhere that's not my kitchen. They left. Victor moved slowly, one hand pressed to his side. Eliza matched his pace, neither helping nor hindering. They ended up in the drawing room, where the fire had burned low. Victor lowered himself onto the sofa, the same one where he'd nearly died, and looked at Eliza. You're right, he said. I am a coward. I have been for 30 years. I shouldn't have said that. Yes, you should have. Someone needed to. Eliza sat in the chair across from him. What happened on the road? The ambush? Business rivals, most likely. I've been negotiating contracts in Edinburgh, shipping routes, trade agreements. Someone didn't want them to go through. He touched the bandage under his shirt. They hired thugs to make sure I wouldn't. Will they try again? Probably. Once they realize I survived. Then you can't go back. Victor's eyes met hers. I have to. I have obligations, contracts to sign. Your obligations can wait. You're in no condition to travel, let alone fight off assassins. I've survived worse. Barely. Eliza leaned forward. Stay, at least until you're healed. Here? Where else? I thought you hated me. I do. A little. But I also just spent 4 days keeping you alive. It would be a waste if you got yourself killed the moment you left. Victor studied her. What changed? What do you mean? The woman I married barely spoke at the wedding. Didn't argue, didn't fight. Now you're calling me a coward and telling me what to do. He tilted his head. What happened to you here? Eliza thought about the past 8 months. The roof, the garden, the washing. Annie's hands, raw from cold water. Mrs. Cowan's smile when the new pots arrived. Mr. Sowerby's quiet pride when the wall was finished. I stopped waiting for someone to save me, she said, and I saved myself. Something shifted in Victor's expression. I'm beginning to see that. He stayed, not because Eliza asked, though that was part of it, but because leaving would have been suicide, and even Victor wasn't that self-destructive. The days fell into a strange rhythm. Victor slept in the drawing room, recovering slowly. Eliza managed the household. They crossed paths at meals, in hallways, in the kitchen where Mrs. Cowan fed them both with equal determination. They talked, not about the marriage or the future, but about smaller things. Books. The estate. The garden Mr. Sowerby was planning for spring. He wants roses, Victor said one afternoon, reading over the plans Eliza had left on the desk. I told him to include them. Roses are impractical. So is most of life. Victor smiled, a real one this time. You sound like my sister. Catherine? His smile faded. You know about her? Mrs. Greer told me. About the fire. Victor set down the plans carefully. She loved roses. Used to steal them from the garden and put them in my room. Said they made things smell less like boy. His voice was quiet, distant. She died holding her favorite doll. I found it in the ashes. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. That doesn't make it hurt less. He looked at her then, really looked. No, it doesn't. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Eliza reached across the desk and covered his hand with hers. He didn't pull away. A week into Victor's recovery, Eliza found him trying to walk the grounds. What are you doing? She called from the kitchen door. Testing my limits. By tearing your stitches? They're healing fine. Eliza marched across the muddy yard. Victor had made it as far as the garden wall, the one Mr. Sowerby had rebuilt, and was leaning against it, breathing hard. You're impossible, she said. I've been called worse. By me, probably. He laughed, then winced. Don't make me laugh. It hurts. Good. Maybe you'll learn to stay in bed. I've been in bed for a week. I'm going mad. Eliza studied him. His color was better, at least. The gray pallor had faded to something closer to normal. But he was still too thin, still moving like every step cost him. Come on, she said, offering her arm. Let's walk, slowly. They walked the perimeter of the garden, Victor leaning on her more than he probably wanted to admit. The ground was soft from recent rain, new grass just starting to push through the mud. Mr. Sowerby's done good work, Victor said, looking at the wall. He's talented, just needed someone to give him resources and trust him. You did that. Someone had to. Victor stopped, turning to face her. I'm starting to understand what I did. Sending you here. Abandoning you. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just running, like I've always run. Yes. You don't forgive easily, do you? Would you? If someone treated you the way you treated me? No, he admitted. I wouldn't. They walked in silence for a while. Then Victor spoke again. I want to make this right. The marriage, the estate, everything. How? I don't know yet, but I'm asking you to give me time to figure it out. Eliza considered this. Time I can give. Trust? That you'll have to earn. Fair enough. They made it back to the house as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Victor was exhausted. Eliza could see it in the way he moved, but there was something different in his expression, something lighter. Thank you, he said as they reached the door. For what? For not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. Eliza met his eyes. I didn't do it for you. I did it because giving up isn't in my nature. I'm starting to see that too. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later. Eliza was in the garden with Mr. Sowerby, marking out beds for planting when she heard shouting from the house. She ran back to find Mrs. Greer at the door, facing down 2 men on horseback. Well-dressed, armed. I don't care who sent you, Mrs. Greer was saying. The Duke is not receiving visitors. We're not visitors, the taller one said. We're here on behalf of Lord Ashford. He requires the Duke's signature on certain documents. Then Lord Ashford can wait. He's waited long enough. Eliza stepped forward. What's this about? The men looked her over. Muddy dress, dirt under her nails, hair tied back with a rag, and clearly decided she was a servant. Fetch your mistress, the tall one said. We need to speak with the Duchess. I am the Duchess. Both men blinked. You're... The shorter one recovered first. Your Grace, forgive us. We expected... Someone who doesn't work in her own garden? Eliza crossed her arms. What do you want? As I said, we're here on behalf of Lord Ashford. The Duke was supposed to sign contracts 3 weeks ago. He hasn't. Lord Ashford is concerned. The Duke was ambushed and nearly killed. He's in no condition to sign anything. The men exchanged glances. Perhaps your Grace could sign in his stead, the tall one suggested. As his wife, you have certain legal authorities. I'm aware of my legal authorities, Eliza interrupted. What I don't have is a reason to trust you. For all I know, you're the ones who tried to kill him. Your Grace, we represent Lord Ashford, a respected... I don't care who you represent. Get off my property. The shorter man's hand drifted toward his sword. Perhaps you don't understand. Perhaps you don't understand that I have a shotgun in the house and a groundskeeper who knows how to use it. Eliza didn't blink. Leave. Now. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Victor's voice came from behind her. You heard the Duchess. Leave. He stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to his side, looking pale but steady. The two men stared. Your Grace, the tall one said. We were told you were nearly dead. I was. My wife saved me. Well, Victor moved to stand beside Eliza. And now she's telling you to leave. So leave. The men hesitated. We need those contracts signed, the shorter one said. Lord Ashford has been very patient, but then he can be patient a bit longer. Victor's voice was steel. Or he can come himself if it matters so much. But these men, he gestured at the armed riders, don't come back, not without an invitation. Is that clear? Your Grace, is that clear? The tall one's jaw tightened. Perfectly, Your Grace. They left, but not before the shorter one shot Eliza a look that made her skin crawl. When they were gone, Eliza rounded on Victor. You shouldn't be out of bed. I'm fine. You're bleeding through your shirt. He looked down. She was right. A small red stain spreading across the bandage. Damn. Come on. Eliza took his arm, surprisingly gentle. Let's get you back inside before you tear all my hard work. They made it as far as the drawing room before Victor spoke again. Thank you, he said, for handling them. Someone had to. Most wives would have deferred to their husbands. I'm not most wives. No. Victor looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. You're not. Eliza helped him sit, then went to fetch clean bandages. When she returned, Victor was reading the documents the men had left. They dropped them in their hurry to leave. What is it? She asked. A contract. For shipping routes through Scotland. His mouth pressed into a thin line. Worth about 60,000 pounds. Eliza nearly dropped the bandages. 60,000? Ashford and I were negotiating terms. He wants me to grant him exclusive access to certain ports. In exchange, I'd get a cut of the profits. And someone doesn't want that to happen. Apparently not. Victor set the papers aside as Eliza began unwrapping the old bandage. The wound looked better, no infection, edges starting to heal, but he'd definitely torn a few stitches. This is going to hurt, she warned. It already hurts. She worked quickly, cleaning the wound, restitching what had come loose. Victor's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping, but he didn't make a sound. When she was done, Eliza sat back. You need to stop trying to do too much. I know. And those men will be back, or others like them. I know that too. So what are you going to do? Victor was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm going to trust you. With what? Everything. He looked at her. I want you to handle the estate. Fully. Not just the household, but the business side too. Contracts, accounts, all of it. Eliza stared. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. You've proven you can manage things better than I can. You turned this place around in 8 months with no money and no support. Imagine what you could do with actual resources. Victor, I don't know anything about trade routes or shipping. You'll learn. You're clever enough. He reached for her hand. I'm offering you real power, Eliza, not just a title, actual authority over my holdings. Why? Because I trust you. And because, he paused, because I'm tired of being alone. And I think you are too. Eliza's heart was hammering. This doesn't fix what you did, sending me here, cutting me off. I know. And I'm still angry with you. I know that too. But But I'm asking anyway. His hand tightened on hers. Stay. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to. Help me rebuild this place. Make it what it should have been. He met her eyes. Be my partner. For real this time. Outside, the first rain of spring began to fall. Eliza looked at their joined hands. At the man who'd banished her, then crawled back half dead. At the drawing room where she'd kept him alive through sheer stubbornness. She thought about the contracts worth £60,000. About the men with swords who'd looked at her like she was nothing. About 8 months of survival and small victories and learning that she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined. On one condition, she said, name it. You never threaten me again. You never cut me off. And if we disagree, when we disagree, we talk about it like adults instead of you running away. Victor's mouth quirked. That's 3 conditions. Take it or leave it. He laughed. Actually laughed. Full and genuine. You drive a hard bargain, wife. I learned from the best. Done. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. We have a deal. And for the first time since their wedding day, Eliza smiled at her husband without a trace of bitterness. The rain continued outside, washing clean the moors, the garden, the walls that had stood for centuries and would stand for centuries more. Inside Thornwood Abbey, something new was beginning. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue, but a partnership. Hard-earned, hard-won, and entirely their own. Eliza looked at Victor, this man who'd tried to bury her and instead given her the tools to build an empire, and made a decision. Tomorrow, she said, we start going through those contracts. All of them. I want to understand every detail. Victor's eyes lit up. Tomorrow, but tonight. Tonight you rest. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor. I'm the woman who sewed you back together, close enough. He settled back against the cushions, still holding her hand. Eliza? Yes? I meant what I said, about trust, about partnership. I know. And I'm going to prove it, every day, for as long as it takes. Eliza squeezed his hand. Good, because I'm not easy to convince. I wouldn't want you any other way. They sat like that as the fire burned low and the rain drummed against the windows. 2 people who'd started as strangers became enemies and were now, slowly, carefully, becoming something neither of them had expected. Equals. Partners. Maybe, eventually, something more. But that was a story for another day. For now, this was enough. Morning came with unexpected clarity. Eliza woke to sunlight, actual sunlight, the first she'd seen in weeks, streaming through the bedroom window. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the house. No wind battering the walls, no rain drumming the roof, just silence, broken occasionally by the distant clatter of Mrs. Cowan in the kitchen. She dressed quickly and went downstairs. Victor was already awake, sitting at the desk in the study, a room Eliza had claimed months ago when she'd started managing the household accounts. He was reading through papers, making notes in the margins with the focused intensity of a man who'd spent his life building empires. You're up early, she said from the doorway. He looked up, couldn't sleep, kept thinking about those contracts. And I think you were right about everything. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. I want to show you something. Eliza sat. Victor spread the documents across the desk, not just Ashford's shipping contract, but others, dozens of them. Trade agreements, property deeds, investment portfolios. This is my entire estate, he said. Everything I own, every business arrangement, every source of income. I want you to understand all of it. That could take weeks. Then we'll take weeks. Eliza picked up the nearest document, a contract for wool exports to France. The terms were dense, full of legal language she barely understood. I don't know what half of this means, she admitted. You will. I'll teach you. Why? Victor set down his pen. Because if something happens to me, another ambush, illness, anything, you need to be able to run this estate without me. Not as a figurehead, as the actual authority. You're talking about giving me power that most men would never give their wives. Most men are fools. He met her eyes. You've already proven you're more capable than half the stewards I've employed. You turned Thornwood from a ruin into something livable with no resources and active opposition from me. Imagine what you could do with my full support. Eliza traced the edge of the contract. This isn't just about the estate, is it? No. Then what? Victor leaned back in his chair. When I was lying in the mud, bleeding, I thought about all the years I'd wasted, keeping people at arm's length, refusing to trust anyone, building walls so high no one could climb them. He paused. And I thought about you, the one person who should have hated me most, and instead you saved my life. Not because you had to, because you chose to. I'm still angry with you. I know, but you're here, and that's more than I deserve. Eliza looked at the papers spread before them, the sum of Victor's life, laid out for her inspection. It was trust in its rawest form, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Where do we start? She asked. Victor smiled. With Ashford's contract, and why I think he's trying to cheat me. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, breaking only when Mrs. Cowan insisted they eat something. Victor walked Eliza through each clause, explaining the implications, the risks, the potential profits. See this section? He pointed to a paragraph buried in the middle. It says Ashford gets exclusive access to 3 ports for 5 years. But look at the termination clause. If I breach the contract for any reason, even if he breaches first, I owe him £20,000 in penalties. That's extortion. That's business. At least that's what he'd claim. Victor made another note. But here's the interesting part. The contract requires my signature within 30 days of negotiation, or it's void. We're on day 28. So if you don't sign by tomorrow, but the whole thing falls apart. Ashford gets nothing, and he's invested considerable resources preparing for this deal. Eliza studied the contract. That's why he sent those men. He's desperate. Exactly. So what do you do? Victor tapped the pen against the desk. What would you do? Eliza considered this. I'd counteroffer, remove the penalty clause, reduce the exclusivity period to 3 years, and increase your profit share. If he refuses, let it die. And if he's the one who sent the assassins, then letting the deal die is the safest option anyway. Victor's eyes gleamed. You have good instincts. I've had good teachers. Poverty teaches you to spot a bad deal. He laughed, that same rusty sound from before, but easier now. All right, we'll send a counteroffer. You'll draft it. Me? You understand the problems. You propose the solutions. You should write the terms. Eliza's heart kicked against her ribs. Victor, I've never drafted a legal contract. Then this will be your first. I'll review it before we send it, but the initial draft should be yours. It was another test. Another wall coming down. Eliza pulled paper toward her and began to write. The counteroffer went out the next morning, delivered by Mr. Sowerby on his weekly trip to the village. Eliza had stayed up half the night perfecting the language, with Victor offering corrections but letting her find her own voice. It's good, he'd said, reading the final version. Better than some contracts I've seen from trained solicitors. You're just saying that. I'm not. He'd met her eyes. You're a natural at this, Eliza. You see patterns, understand leverage. That's rare. Now, waiting for Ashford's response, they turned to other matters. The estate needed immediate attention. The fields hadn't been planted in years. The tenants, few as they were, paid rent to an absent landlord who'd never once visited them. Repairs were long overdue on cottages, fences, drainage systems. How much would it cost to make this place functional again? Eliza asked, looking at Mr. Sowerby's estimates. £500, Victor said. Maybe more. That's a fortune. It's an investment. A working estate generates income. A dead one just drains resources. Do you have £500? Victor's mouth quirked. I have considerably more than that. The question is whether I'm willing to spend it on Thornwood. And are you? He looked at her. I am now. They started small, hired workers from the village to clear fields, brought in a surveyor to map drainage patterns, ordered seeds, tools, livestock. Word spread quickly. The Duke of Blackmore was investing in Thornwood. The cursed estate was coming back to life. And the Duchess, the strange woman who worked in the garden and took in washing, was apparently the driving force behind it all. People started showing up. Tenants who'd given up on ever seeing improvements, workers looking for steady employment. Even the village priest, curiosity evident in every line of his face. "Your Grace," he said, hat in hand, when Eliza met him at the door. "I heard rumors, but I hardly believed them. The Duke is truly staying at Thornwood?" "He is." "And you're managing the estate?" "We both are." The priest's eyebrows rose. "Remarkable. I don't suppose you'd be interested in restoring the old chapel. It's been abandoned since the fire." Eliza glanced at Victor, who'd appeared behind her. "How much would restoration cost?" Victor asked. "I couldn't say exactly, but the structure is sound. Mostly needs cleaning, new glass for the windows, some carpentry." "Send me an estimate," Eliza said. "We'll consider it." After the priest left, Victor turned to her. "A chapel? You said we're rebuilding this place. Might as well rebuild all of it, including the parts that connect us to the community?" "Especially those parts." Victor studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, but you handle the negotiations." "Why me?" "Because you're better at dealing with people than I am. They like you." "They're scared of you." Exactly. Which is why you should be the face of this operation." It was happening slowly, but it was happening. Victor was sharing power. Not as a gesture or a test, but as a genuine partnership. Eliza found she liked it. More than liked it. She was good at this. Managing people, solving problems, seeing 3 steps ahead. All the skills she'd developed surviving her father's ruin and 8 months of isolation were suddenly useful in ways she'd never imagined. Ashford's response arrived a week later. He rejected the counteroffer, flat out refused every change, demanded the original terms, and threatened legal action if Victor didn't sign within 3 days. "He's bluffing," Eliza said, reading the letter. "Maybe. He has no grounds for legal action. The contract expired. He missed the deadline. Unless he argues that my injury constituted an unforeseen circumstance, which would extend the deadline under common law." Eliza frowned. "Would that work? In front of the right judge?" "Possibly." "So what do we do?" Victor took the letter and fed it to the fire. "We ignore him. He threatened legal action." "Let him try. I have better lawyers." "What if he sends more men? What if he tries to finish what the assassins started?" "Then we'll be ready." Victor walked to the window, looking out over the grounds. The fields were being cleared, workers visible even from this distance. Smoke rose from cottages being repaired. Life, returning to a place that had been dead for decades. "I spent 30 years running from this place," he said quietly. "From the memories, the pain. I thought if I never came back, I could pretend it didn't happen, that my family didn't burn, that I didn't survive when they didn't." "Victor, but you changed that. You took the place I was most afraid of and made it somewhere worth being. And now Ashford thinks he can threaten that? Threaten you?" He turned to face her. "I won't run anymore. Not from him. Not from anyone." Eliza crossed to stand beside him. "Then we fight." "We fight," he agreed. Ashford's men came 3 days later. Not 2 riders this time, a dozen. Armed, aggressive, clearly not here for negotiation. Eliza saw them from the garden and ran for the house. "Victor, we have company." He appeared in the doorway, took one look at the approaching riders, and his expression went cold. "Get inside," he said. "Like hell." "Eliza, this is my home too. I'm not hiding." Victor looked like he wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The riders had reached the gate. The new gate Mr. Sowerby had built, sturdy and imposing. The leader dismounted. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome before too much drink and violence had ruined it. "I'm here for the Duke," he announced. "You're looking at him," Victor said from the doorway. "Lord Ashford wants his contract signed." "Lord Ashford can want whatever he likes. The contract expired. There's nothing to sign." "He disagrees, and he sent me to collect what's owed." "I owe him nothing." The man smiled. It wasn't pleasant. "See, that's where you're wrong. Lord Ashford invested £20,000 preparing for this deal. Ships, warehouses, workers. He's out of pocket, and someone needs to pay. That's his problem. It's about to be yours." The man gestured, and his riders spread out, surrounding the gate. Sign the contract, or we take payment another way. Eliza stepped forward before Victor could stop her. You're on private property, threatening a peer of the realm. That's a crime. The man's eyes cut to her. And you are? The Duchess? And you're trespassing. Pretty thing, aren't you? Shame you married a man who can't keep his word. My husband owes your employer nothing. Now leave, or I'll have the magistrate brought from Hexham. The man laughed. The magistrate's 3 hours away, love. A lot can happen in 3 hours. Well, Victor's hand went to his side, where Eliza knew he kept a pistol now, ever since the ambush. Touch my wife, he said quietly, and I'll kill you where you stand. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Then Mr. Sowerby appeared from the stables, shotgun in hand. Mrs. Greer stepped out of the kitchen door, rifle. Where had she gotten a rifle? Leveled at the riders. Even Annie was there, holding a kitchen knife like she knew how to use it. The workers in the fields had stopped, a dozen of them, all watching. The leader looked around, reassessing. This is a mistake, he said. The only mistake, Eliza said, is you thinking we're alone out here. This estate employs 30 people now. They all live within shouting distance. Touch any of us, and you'll answer to all of them. It was a bluff. They employed maybe 15 people, and most of them were elderly or young. But the leader didn't know that. Lord Ashford won't forget this, he said. Good, Victor replied. Tell him if he wants to discuss business, he can come himself. Like a civilized man, not send thugs to threaten my household. The leader mounted his horse. You'll regret this. I doubt it. They left, but slowly, making sure everyone knew they weren't scared, just choosing to leave. When they were gone, Eliza's legs nearly gave out. Victor caught her. That was incredibly stupid, he said. It worked. They could have killed you. They could have killed you. Again. She looked up at him. I told you. I'm not hiding. Victor's arms tightened around her. You're going to give me a heart attack before this is all over. Good thing you married someone who knows how to stitch you back together. He laughed, shaky but real. Come on, let's get everyone inside. We need to talk about security. But that night they gathered in the kitchen, all of them. Victor, Eliza, Mrs. Greer, Mrs. Cowan, Annie, Mr. Sowerby. Even a few of the workers from the village who'd heard about the confrontation. Ashford's not going to stop, Victor said. He'll send more men or try something else. We need to be prepared. We could hire guards, Mr. Sowerby suggested. That takes money and time. We could ask the village for help, Annie said quietly. Most folks around here don't like nobility much, but they like bullies even less. Victor looked at Eliza. What do you think? She thought about the past months, the way the village had slowly warmed to them, the way reputation spread faster than fire in small communities. We make this public, she said. We tell everyone what Ashford's doing, that he's trying to extort money from a deal that fell through, that he's threatening violence. People talk. Word gets to London, to other nobles, to investors. Ashford's reputation takes a hit. That could backfire, Mrs. Greer said. What if people side with him? They won't, Eliza said. Because we're not just going to tell them what he's doing. We're going to show them what we're building here. The jobs we're creating, the repairs we're making, the community we're rebuilding. She looked around the table. We make Thornwood so visible, so vital, that attacking it becomes political suicide. Victor was staring at her. That's brilliant. It's risky. So is doing nothing. They voted. Everyone agreed. The next morning, Eliza wrote letters. To the village council, to the parish, to newspapers in Hexham and Newcastle. She didn't exaggerate, didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. Lord Ashford, attempting to enforce a contract that had legally expired, had sent armed men to threaten a duke and duchess on their own property. The story spread like wildfire. Within 2 weeks, everything changed. Ashford's investors started pulling out. Other nobles, people Victor had business with, people who mattered, sent letters expressing concern and support. The magistrate in Hexham launched an inquiry into the armed confrontation. Ashford tried to fight back, claiming Victor had breached contract in bad faith. But the evidence didn't support him. The deadline had passed. The terms had been rejected. There was no case. He sent one final letter, delivered by a nervous courier who barely made eye contact. Blackmore, you've made your point. The contract is dead. Keep your estate and your reputation. But know this, you've made an enemy today, and I don't forget." Ashford Victor read it aloud to Eliza, then burned it. "Are you worried?" she asked. "About Ashford? No, he's a bully who got outmaneuvered. He'll sulk and find someone else to bother. And the threat? Empty. He knows now that we have support, resources, and the will to fight back. He won't risk his own reputation for revenge." Eliza wanted to believe that, but something in Ashford's words made her uneasy. Still, they had more immediate concerns. The estate was thriving, fields planted, cottages repaired, workers hired. The chapel restoration had begun, the priest overseeing it with almost religious fervor, which seemed appropriate. Money flowed out faster than it came in, but Victor didn't seem concerned. "Investments pay off slowly," he said when Eliza brought it up. "We won't see profit for a year, maybe 2, but we will see it. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we trust the process." It was strange hearing Victor talk about trust. The man who'd spent 3 decades trusting no one, suddenly willing to invest everything in an uncertain future. But it was working. The estate wasn't just surviving. It was thriving, and so were the people on it. Annie had bloomed, literally. She'd gained weight, lost that hunted look, started smiling. She was learning to read, taught by Mrs. Greer in the evenings. Had opinions now, voiced carefully but firmly. Mrs. Cowan's hand still ached, but with Annie's help, she was cooking meals that actually tasted good. She'd even started experimenting, roasts with herbs, bread with different grains. Mr. Sowerby had transformed the garden. Vegetables were growing. The roses he'd planted for Victor's sister had taken root, delicate pink blooms that made Victor stop and stare every time he passed them. Mrs. Greer remained Mrs. Greer, stern, efficient, impossible to read. But Eliza caught her smiling sometimes when she thought no one was looking. And Thornwood itself had changed. No longer a grave, no longer a place people avoided. It was becoming a home. Oh. Summer arrived with unexpected warmth. Eliza stood in the garden one afternoon watching workers bring in the first harvest. Potatoes mostly, and some early lettuce. Not much, but enough to feel like victory. Victor found her there. "We did it," he said. "Did what?" "This. All of this." He gestured at the fields, the house, the people. "We brought this place back from the dead." "You sound surprised." "I am. I've spent my whole life destroying things. Relationships, opportunities, my own happiness. Building something feels strange." Eliza turned to face him. "You're not the man you were 8 months ago." "Neither are you." "No, I'm not." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the moors. The same moors that had seemed so hostile, so empty, now felt almost welcoming. "Eliza," Victor said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart kicked. "What?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them, fragile and terrifying. "You don't have to say it back," he added quickly. I needed you to know that this isn't just partnership anymore, not for me." Eliza's throat felt tight. "When did you realize?" "When you called me a coward, and when you stitched me up, and when you faced down Ashford's men with nothing but stubbornness and a kitchen knife." He smiled. "Probably before that, if I'm honest. But I was too much of a bastard to admit it." "You're still a bit of a bastard." "I know. And I'm still angry about the first 8 months." "I know that too." But, Eliza took his hand. "But I'm starting to think we might actually make this work." It wasn't a declaration of love. Not yet. But it was hope. And for 2 people who'd started with nothing but resentment and survival instincts, hope was everything. Victor kissed her then. Not the cold brush of lips from their wedding day, but something real, warm, full of promise and apology, and a future neither of them had expected. When they broke apart, Eliza was smiling. "We should go inside," she said. "Mrs. Cowan's making roast chicken." In a minute, Victor pulled her closer. "I want to stay here a bit longer. With you." So they did. 2 people who'd been bought and sold, abandoned, and exiled, now choosing each other freely. The moors stretched around them, wild and beautiful and theirs. And for the first time since arriving at Thornwood, Eliza felt something she'd never expected to feel here. Home. Autumn brought changes no one anticipated. A letter arrived from London, thick, official, bearing the seal of the Lord Chancellor's office. Victor opened it in the study, Eliza reading over his shoulder. Your Grace, in light of your recent efforts to restore the Thornwood estate and your exemplary handling of the matter with Lord Ashford, His Majesty wishes to recognize your contributions to the Northern Territories. You are hereby invited to attend the autumn session of Parliament, where you will be asked to advise on matters of estate management and rural development. Furthermore, Her Grace the Duchess of Blackmore is invited to participate in the Queen's Committee on Land Reform, the first such invitation extended to a woman in over a decade. Please confirm your attendance at your earliest convenience. Eliza read it 3 times to make sure she understood. They want me in Parliament, she said, advising on land reform. Yes. Women don't do that. You're not most women. Victor, this is... I can't... Why not? Because I have no training, no education in policy, no... You turned a dying estate into a profitable enterprise with no resources and active opposition. You negotiated with workers, managed budgets, stood up to armed thugs. If that doesn't qualify you to advise on land reform, I don't know what does. Eliza sat down slowly. You really think I can do this? I know you can. What if I fail? Then you'll fail spectacularly, and we'll figure out what to do next. He knelt beside her chair. Eliza, you've spent your whole life being told you couldn't do things. Your father said you couldn't save his estate. I said you couldn't manage Thornwood. Ashford thought you couldn't stand up to him. You proved everyone wrong. Why stop now? She looked at him, this man who'd tried to bury her and instead given her wings. All right, she said. I'll do it. Victor grinned. That's my Duchess, Mike. They left for London in October, taking Mrs. Greer and Annie with them. Mr. Sowerby stayed behind to manage the estate, a responsibility he took with surprising seriousness. Don't worry, Your Grace, he told Eliza before they left. I'll keep things running. You just go show those Parliament fools how it's done. London was overwhelming. Eliza had been there before, briefly, during her father's final desperate attempts to save his estate, but she'd never been there as a duchess, never walked into rooms where people actually listened when she spoke. The Queen's Committee met twice a week. 12 women, all titled, all wealthy, most of them twice Eliza's age. They looked at her like she was a curiosity at first. The Duchess who worked in gardens, the woman who'd tamed the Duke of Blackmore. But when she started talking about crop rotation, drainage systems, fair wages, sustainable development, they started listening. You learned all this at Thornwood? One of them asked. I learned it by necessity, Eliza replied. When you have no money and a dying estate, you figure things out quickly. And your husband supports this work? My husband is the one who suggested I join this committee. That raised eyebrows. Dukes didn't usually encourage their wives to have opinions, let alone share them publicly. But Victor did. He attended Parliament, advised on trade policy, rebuilt connections he'd let wither for years. And every evening, he and Eliza would compare notes over dinner, sharing victories and frustrations. Lord Pemberton tried to argue that tenant wages are too high, Victor said one night. What did you say? That he's welcome to try living on 3 shillings a week and see how he likes it. Eliza laughed. I bet that went over well. He called me a radical. I took it as a compliment. They were becoming known as the reformist Duke and Duchess, the couple who'd rebuilt Thornwood and were now trying to rebuild half of England's rural economy. Not everyone approved. There were whispers, criticism, a few nobles cut them at social events. But there was also respect, and slowly, grudgingly, change. But winter came. They returned to Thornwood in December, exhausted but triumphant. The committee had adopted 3 of Eliza's proposals. Parliament was debating estate tax reform based on Victor's suggestions. The estate welcomed them back like heroes. The fields were harvested and profitable. The cottages were warm. The chapel was finished, beautiful in its simplicity, a memorial to Victor's family and a promise for the future. On Christmas Eve, they held a celebration, not just for the household, but for everyone, workers, tenants, villagers. The Great Hall, cleared and cleaned for the first time in 30 years, filled with people. Mrs. Cowan had outdone herself. Roast goose, potatoes, bread, even a cake. Annie helped serve, glowing with pride. Victor stood and raised his glass. "A year ago," he said, "this place was dead. I was dead. In all the ways that mattered. I'd given up on happiness, on connection, on hope." He looked at Eliza. "And then my wife, this extraordinary, stubborn, brilliant woman, decided that wasn't good enough. She took a dying estate and brought it back to life. She took a broken man and reminded him what it means to be human." He turned to address the room. "We couldn't have done this without all of you. Your work, your faith, your willingness to believe that Thornwood could be more than a grave." He raised his glass higher. "To the future, to partnership, to home." "To home," the room echoed. Eliza's eyes were wet. She stood, taking Victor's hand. "I came here as an exile," she said. "A transaction. A woman who'd been sold to solve a problem. I had nothing, no money, no power, no hope. But I found something here. I found people worth fighting for, work worth doing, and a partner worth trusting." She squeezed Victor's hand. "Thank you, all of you, for giving me a home when I thought I'd never have one again." The applause was deafening. Later, when the celebration had wound down and most people had gone home, Eliza and Victor stood together on the front steps, looking out over the estate. Snow was falling, soft, gentle, covering the moors in white. "Are you happy?" Victor asked. Eliza considered this. Happiness felt like too small a word for what she felt. Fulfilled, purposeful, loved. "Yes," she said. "I am." "Even after everything?" "Because of everything." Victor pulled her closer. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." "Good." They stood like that until the cold drove them inside, where the fire was warm and the future stretched ahead, full of possibility. Eliza Blackmore, once a desperate daughter, a discarded bride, an exiled wife, had become something no one expected, least of all herself. A duchess with power. A partner with purpose. A woman who'd survived the edge of nowhere and built an empire from ashes. Not because someone rescued her, but because she'd rescued herself. And in doing so, she'd rescued the man who'd tried to bury her, the estate that had nearly killed them both, and a future neither had dared to imagine. The moors would always be harsh, the wind would always howl. But Thornwood Abbey was no longer a grave. It was home. And home, Eliza had learned, was worth fighting for. Bam! 3 years later. The gardens were magnificent. Roses bloomed in every color. Pink for Catherine, red for passion, white for new beginnings. Vegetables grew in neat rows, tended by workers who knew every plant by name. The orchards Victor had planted were bearing fruit, apples, pears, plums. Thornwood had become the model estate. Nobles visited to see what the Duke and Duchess had accomplished. Articles were written. The Queen herself had toured the grounds and declared it a triumph of modern agricultural practice. Eliza stood in the garden, watching the sunset, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The baby would come soon. In a month, maybe less. She wasn't scared. Not anymore. She'd faced down poverty, exile, armed thugs, and London society. Childbirth seemed almost manageable by comparison. "There you are." Victor appeared at her side, slightly out of breath. "I've been looking everywhere." I wanted to see the roses." "You see the roses every day." "I like seeing them." He put his arm around her. "How are you feeling?" "Large, uncomfortable, ready for this baby to arrive." "Soon." "Not soon enough." Victor laughed. "You've gotten impatient in your old age." "I'm 25. "Ancient." She elbowed him. "How was your meeting with the agricultural minister?" "Productive. He wants us to advise on the new tenant rights legislation." "Both of us?" "He specifically asked for you, said you have uncommon insight into practical matters." Eliza smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." "You should." They walked back toward the house. Their house, truly theirs now in every sense. The east wing had been rebuilt. The rooms were furnished. There was warmth, laughter, life. Annie met them at the door. She was 18 now, no longer a frightened girl, but a confident young woman. She'd learned to read, write, manage household accounts, was courting the blacksmith's son, much to Mrs. Greer's approval. "Your Grace," she said to Eliza, "Mrs. Cowan wants to know if you're hungry. Starving. She made your favorite, roast chicken with herbs. Tell her I love her." Annie grinned and disappeared. Victor helped Eliza up the steps. She hated needing help, but her balance wasn't what it used to be. "Victor," she said as they reached the entry hall. "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For listening. When I told you to stay. When I challenged you. When I refused to disappear." Victor stopped, turning to face her fully. "Eliza, you saved my life, literally and figuratively. I should be thanking you every day for the rest of my life." "You kind of do." "Good. I plan to continue." He kissed her, still warm, still full of promise, still choosing her every single day. When they broke apart, Eliza looked around the hall, at the paintings they'd hung together, the furniture they'd chosen, the life they'd built from nothing. "We did it," she said. "We did. Not perfectly." "No, but perfectly enough." And standing there in the house that had once been her prison, with the man who'd once been her warden, Eliza Blackmore felt something she'd never expected to feel when she first arrived 8 months pregnant with possibility and 3 years rich with partnership. Complete. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. And real, messy, hard-won was better than any fairy tale. Victor led her into the dining room, where Mrs. Cowan had indeed prepared a feast. Not just chicken, but roasted vegetables from their own garden, bread still warm from the oven, and a pie made with apples from the orchard they'd planted 2 years ago. "You're spoiling me," Eliza said as Victor helped her into her chair. "You're carrying my child. I'm allowed to spoil you." Mrs. Greer appeared with tea, her expression as neutral as ever, but Eliza caught the slight softening around her eyes. The housekeeper had become something more than staff over the years, almost family, though she'd never admit it. "Will you be needing anything else, Your Grace?" Mrs. Greer asked. "Just your company," Eliza said. "Sit with us, please." Mrs. Greer hesitated. Old habits died hard, but after a moment she pulled out a chair and sat, back straight, hands folded. It was a small thing, a housekeeper dining with the Duke and Duchess. But it was everything Thornwood had become, a place where hierarchy mattered less than humanity. They ate in comfortable conversation, discussing the harvest estimates, the new workers Victor wanted to hire, Annie's upcoming wedding, normal things, domestic things, things Eliza had never imagined wanting, let alone having. "I received a letter from Lady Pemberton today," Victor said, cutting into his chicken. "She wants to visit next month. Bring her daughters." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "The same Lady Pemberton whose husband called you a radical?" "The very same. Apparently she's impressed by what we've accomplished, wants to learn our methods." "And her husband?" "Conveniently busy with Parliament." Mrs. Greer made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The nobility are nothing if not adaptable. 6 months ago they were calling you reformists and troublemakers. Now they want invitations to your estate." "Let them come," Eliza said. "Maybe they'll learn something." "Or maybe they'll just complain about the lack of formal gardens," Victor said dryly. "Then they can plant their own." After dinner, Victor insisted Eliza rest while he handled correspondence. She didn't argue, her back ached and her feet were swollen, but instead of going to bed, she found herself in the nursery. They'd prepared it together over the past months. A room in the west wing, freshly painted a soft yellow, filled with a cradle Victor had commissioned from the village carpenter. Blankets Annie had helped sew. Toys Mrs. Cowan had somehow acquired despite claiming she knew nothing about babies. Eliza ran her hand over the cradle, imagining a child sleeping there. Her child. Victor's child. A Blackmore who would grow up knowing love, stability, safety. Everything Victor hadn't had. Everything Eliza had lost when her mother died. "You're supposed to be resting." She turned to find Victor in the doorway. "I was resting, just not in bed." He crossed to her, placing his hand over hers on the cradle. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified." "You? The woman who faced down Ashford's thugs?" "That was different. I knew what I was doing there." "And you'll know what to do with this baby. You always figure things out. Eliza leaned against him. What if I'm a terrible mother? What if I don't know how to? You won't be, and you will. Victor's arms came around her, careful of her belly. You built an estate from nothing. You changed laws in Parliament. You made me believe in happiness again. If you can do all that, you can certainly handle one small human. Small humans are unpredictable. So are you. You'll get along fine. She laughed despite herself. You're very confident in my abilities. Always. They stood together in the quiet nursery, watching the last light fade from the windows. Outside, the moors stretched dark and endless, but inside there was warmth, light, future. Victor, Eliza said softly, do you ever think about that first night when you left me here? Every day. Do you regret it? He was quiet for a moment. I regret the pain I caused you, the loneliness, the fear, but I don't regret that it brought us here, to this. He turned her to face him. You wouldn't be who you are if I hadn't abandoned you, and I wouldn't be who I am if you hadn't saved me. That's a terrible way to justify bad behavior. I know, but it's true anyway. Eliza touched his face, feeling the scar on his cheek, the one from the ambush that had brought him back to her. We're both different people now. Better people, I hope. Definitely better. A sharp pain lanced through her belly, making her gasp. Victor's eyes went wide. What is it? The baby? I don't... Another pain, stronger this time. Oh! Oh no! Is it coming? Now? I think so. Victor went pale. But it's too early. We have another month. The midwife isn't even... Victor. Eliza gripped his arm. Get Mrs. Greer. Get Mrs. Cowan. Get everyone. Now. He ran. Listen. The next 12 hours were a blur of pain, fear, and stubborn determination. Mrs. Greer took charge with military efficiency, transforming the bedroom into a birthing room. Mrs. Cowan boiled water, prepared linens, muttered prayers under her breath. Annie fetched and carried, her young face tight with worry. The midwife arrived eventually, summoned from the village, but by then Eliza was too far gone to care about propriety or protocol. Victor refused to leave. The midwife tried to insist men didn't belong in birthing rooms, but Eliza wouldn't let him go. He stays, she gasped between contractions. I don't care about tradition. Your Grace, he stays. The midwife gave up. Victor held Eliza's hand through all of it, his face white but steady. When she screamed, he didn't flinch. When she cursed him for getting her pregnant in the first place, he took it without complaint. I'm never doing this again, Eliza panted. Whatever you say, I mean it. Never. I believe you. You did this to me? I know. I hate you. I love you too. Another contraction hit, worse than the others. Eliza squeezed Victor's hand so hard she thought she might break it. Almost there, the midwife said. One more push, Your Grace. Eliza didn't think she had one more push left in her, but she found it anyway, the same stubbornness that had carried her through 8 months of exile, through Ashford's threats, through every impossible thing she'd survived. And then, impossibly, there was crying. Not hers, smaller, higher, angry at being forced into the world. A girl, the midwife announced, wrapping the tiny, squalling bundle in blankets. Healthy lungs on this one. She placed the baby in Eliza's arms. The world stopped. Eliza looked down at the tiny face, red, wrinkled, furious, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, opening, making room for something bigger than anything she'd known before. Hello, she whispered. Hello, little one. The baby stopped crying, eyes dark, like Victor's, blinking up at her. Victor was crying, actual tears streaming down his face as he stared at his daughter. She's perfect, he said, voice rough. She's angry. She gets that from you. Eliza laughed, exhausted and exhilarated and more complete than she'd ever imagined possible. What should we name her? Victor touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. She gripped it immediately, surprisingly strong. Catherine, he said, after my sister, if that's all right with you. Eliza looked at the baby, at Catherine, and nodded. It's perfect. Mrs. Greer appeared with more blankets, her eyes suspiciously bright. Mrs. Cowan brought broth, insisting Eliza needed to keep her strength up. Annie peeked around the door, gasping when she saw the baby. "She's so small." "All babies are small," Mrs. Greer said. "Can I hold her?" Eliza looked at Victor, who nodded. Carefully, they transferred Catherine to Annie's arms. The girl froze, terrified and delighted in equal measure. "Support her head," Mrs. Greer instructed. "There. Like that." Annie stared down at Catherine with wonder. "She's beautiful, Your Grace." "She is," Eliza agreed. They took turns holding her, even Mrs. Greer, who pretended she was just checking to make sure the baby was properly swaddled but couldn't quite hide her smile. Eventually, everyone left except Victor. He sat beside the bed, watching Eliza and Catherine with an expression she'd never seen before. Pure, uncomplicated joy. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For her. For this. For not giving up on us when you had every reason to." Eliza shifted Catherine in her arms, marveling at how something so small could feel so significant. "You know what's funny? 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be here, in this house, with you, with a baby, I would have thought they were insane. And now? Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Victor leaned in to kiss her forehead. "Get some rest, both of you." "Will you stay?" "Always." He settled into the chair beside the bed, keeping watch as Eliza drifted into exhausted sleep, Catherine warm and safe in her arms. Outside, dawn was breaking over the moors. The same moors that had seemed so hostile, so endless, now felt like protection, like home. Catherine Blackmore grew up surrounded by love and roses. She was walking by her first birthday, running by her second, asking impossible questions by her third. She had Victor's dark hair and Eliza's stubborn chin, and she ruled Thornwood with the absolute authority only a beloved child could command. Annie adored her. Mrs. Cowan baked special treats for her. Mrs. Greer taught her proper manners, though Catherine only followed them when she felt like it. Mr. Sowerby let her help in the garden, which mostly meant she dug holes in random places and declared them essential. Victor was completely helpless against her. The Duke of Blackmore, who'd faced down assassins and parliamentary opponents, crumbled the moment his daughter asked for a story or wanted to be carried. "You're spoiling her," Eliza said one afternoon, watching Victor build an elaborate castle out of wooden blocks, while Catherine directed him with the authority of a general. "She's 3. She's supposed to be spoiled. She's going to grow up thinking the world revolves around her." "It does," Eliza laughed. "You're impossible." "No, Papa," Catherine said, knocking down a tower he'd just finished. "That one goes there." "Of course, silly me." Eliza shook her head, smiling. This was her life now. This beautiful, chaotic, imperfect life. They'd had more children, twins, a boy and a girl, born 2 years after Catherine. The house that had once held only ghosts now echoed with laughter and shouting and the thundering footsteps of children who'd never known what it meant to be unwanted. Thornwood had become legendary, not just as an estate, but as a model for what partnership could accomplish. Other nobles came to study their methods. Parliament cited their work in debates. The Queen herself had sent a personal letter of commendation. But the real measure of their success wasn't in accolades or recognition. It was in the workers who owned their own cottages now, built with fair wages and respect. In the village school they'd funded, where children, including Annie's someday, would learn to read and write. In the chapel where Victor's family was memorialized, and where new families celebrated baptisms and weddings. In the roses that bloomed every spring, pink and persistent, a reminder that beauty could grow from ashes. Eliza stood at the window of her study. Yes, her study, a room Victor had insisted she claim as her own, and looked out over the estate. At the fields green with crops, at the cottages with smoke rising from their chimneys, at the children playing in the garden, Catherine's laugh carrying on the wind. She thought about the girl she'd been. 22, terrified, standing in the rain with nothing but 50 pounds and a dying house. That girl had survived, and in surviving, she had built an empire. Not through conquest or inheritance, but through stubbornness, intelligence, and refusing to accept that exile meant defeat. Victor came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come. Any regrets?" Eliza turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd tried to bury her and instead given her wings. "Not a single one." Not even the first 8 months? Especially not those. They made me who I am. Victor smiled. The Duchess of Thornwood, terror of London society, champion of tenant rights, my partner in everything. Don't forget mother of 3 impossible children. That too. Outside, Catherine shrieked with delight as the twins chased her through the garden. Annie called after them to be careful. Mrs. Greer appeared with stern warnings about muddy clothes. It was chaos. It was beautiful. It was home. And Eliza Blackmore, who'd started with nothing and built everything, stood in the house she'd claimed, with the family she'd made, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd won. Not because someone had rescued her, but because she'd rescued herself. And in doing so, she'd rescued them all.